I'm Jim Check with Now Media. With me, Kay Desjardins. This is our second interview. Last time we were provincial election. Maybe you should come and do April 28th with us, right?
I
You
would
can sit
love
here on the
to.
election desk. Um,
Well,
Former NDP candidate for Lake Country. Now throwing, you sent us a press release, you're now throwing your support behind Liberal candidate, former Liberal MP from Lake Country. They redrew the boundaries though, but Stephen Fuhr. You're actually, instead of like throwing your support behind an NDP candidate, you're doing it for a Liberal. Why is that?
well, I think every time there's an election, it's said that this is the most important election of the year.
They always say that, right? It's
It's
an
always
existential
this,
threat, right?
yes. And every single time, I think I've said it probably multiple times myself. But to be truthful, we look at what's going on south of the border in the United States. And the ballot question is really, in my mind, who is best suited to take on Donald Trump? And when we look at it, you put the resumes of Mark Carney beside Pierre Poilievre. It's a clear choice. And the polls are showing that public opinion is shifting. And as Tom Mulcair said, who's a former NDP leader as well, that this is now a two-horse race. This is a race between Liberals and the Conservatives of who's going to form a government. And it's a government that needs a strong majority to stand up for Canadians, while also standing up for workers and social services and programs. And that's why I believe that Stephen Fuhr, who in his own right is a very experienced individual, strong leader, was a great member of Parliament for Kelowna, needs the support of people like myself who have been members of the NDP, who supported the NDP, who have maybe even ran for the NDP. We are a voice that needs to unite behind a strong person. And the last thing too is that, I railed against when I was running. I was 19 at the time when I was running as a candidate against strategic voting, and that people need an option to vote. The problem is right now, not the problem, but the reality is that this isn't a strategic vote, voting for the Liberals. Right now it's the right vote. The Liberals and Mark Carney have a vision set forward to maintain some security within Canada, maintain some support within our communities, and not threaten to cut off some really, really important supports that this Liberal government has put into place. And so that's kind of why I'm throwing my support behind Stephen Fuhr. It's why I'm supporting the Liberal Party this federal election, and why I think that the 18-20% of folks that voted for me when I ran need to throw their support behind Stephen Fuhr as well.
Yeah, well, you ran against Stephen Fuhr as well, right?
No, in 2021 I ran, it was Tracy Gray.
Oh, okay. Wasn't Stephen Fuhr on the Liberal ticket though?
It's Tim Krupa.
Oh, Tim Krupa. Okay.
So this was the snap election that occurred after Trudeau tried to kind of get a
majority, yeah.
Get a majority, and it turned out nothing really changed. And so Steve Fuhr wasn't involved. It was Tracy Gray. And actually, when you look at the redistribution because of the new Kelowna riding, the NDP support was 21%. And in a tight race, all of those voters need to support the federal Liberals. And I can take it that a lot of probably the votes for the NDP that election was also a protest. But right now we need to channel that energy into getting Stephen across the line.
So what's your message then to Jagmeet Singh? Like, you know what I mean? He's been the leader, and a lot of people say that it needs to be a leadership decision for Jagmeet too. There's, like the polls show he may not even regain his seat. Do you think him propping up the Trudeau Liberals for 2 terms was a detriment to the NDP?
I think there's a few things there. Is one, it definitely was a detriment for the NDP in the sense that politically speaking, the NDP did not see the support that they maybe should have garnered. The Liberals were very good at, because they were the government in power, for taking credit for a lot of the policies the NDP pushed for. But in the process of that, the NDP also kind of shifted the Liberal Party itself to some of these more progressive programs and services, and that became very difficult for the NDP to differentiate themselves from the Liberals on some of these core policies. And frankly, Jagmeet Singh has had a lot of opportunity to deliver results within the House of Commons and deliver results in increasing seat counts, and he hasn't been able to do it. And I think it's time for leadership change, which, Pierre Poilievre was extremely, extremely good at prosecuting the case against Trudeau and against Jagmeet Singh. So much so that's almost now to his detriment, because he essentially rendered Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau's politically, it's almost like a nuclear waste. No one wants to go near them. No one wants to touch them with a 10-foot post. And so I think that there needs to be a change, and the Liberals have seen that change. The NDP needs to make that change. And really, I mean, my views of the NDP, I came up in supporting, NDP leaders like Tom Mulcair, Rachel Notley, John Horgan, now Wab Kinew in Manitoba, kind of these prairie Democrats that, not that Tom Mulcair is from the prairies, but just the grounding roots of Tommy Douglas. And I think the NDP has strayed too far away from really what's the focus. And the focus is workers, the middle class, and supporting those people. And the Liberal Party has become that party. And the NDP is kind of at a loss. I mean, they've seen this happen before, but there needs to be a change for sure.
Yeah, and you talk about Pierre Poilievre as an opposition leader. You'd have to agree, I think, that he was a resounding success at that, because he got them to get rid of the carbon tax, he got them to get rid of the capital gains tax, and he got the leader or the prime minister to leave in tears, basically, right? And then and then a lot of that discontent that we see across Canada for the Liberals was kind of like stuck to Justin, right? I mean, they kind of all just kind of put it on there, and then they've gotten rid of him. And I think whatever's left of it has kind of been sticking to Jagmeet Singh, I think. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like, and Mark Carney gets to walk in there and say, well, that didn't really have much to do with it. But I guess the question to you then is, it's the same team, though. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you reconcile that? It's basically the same team, almost the same cabinet, although it's a slimmed down cabinet. But it's the same, like, my different roles. Stephen Gibault is almost like second in command, and he was one of the architects for the carbon tax. And Chrystia Freeland, second in command, and she said in her own words that the Trudeau Liberals wasted 10 years virtue signaling. I think you even said it yourself just now, virtue signaling and identity politics as opposed to good economic policy. She also said the GST tax break, that 2-month holiday, was more of a political gimmick. And I know that she probably had a little bit of anger when she was walking out the door. But it's the same team. So how does Carney, you're saying he's the man for the job, how does Carney kind of change that boat of people? Do you know what I mean? Because it's all MPs, right? It's not like the like the U.S. where it's a president. It's still, he's got, he's the ambassador kind of thing, the voice of the MPs, but doesn't have presidential powers. So,
okay. Couple things. First, I will say Pierre Poilievre has been a very strong leader of the opposition. He's done his job, but that does not reflect who would be a good prime minister. And I think that needs to be underlined, because it's very easy to attack any government of the day, no matter who the government is. It's very easy to channel people's frustrations. With that being said, when it comes to Mark Carney, I think what people don't understand within our political system, within the political party system, is that power of these political parties is very, very much concentrated within the prime minister's office. The PMO has an extreme amount of power in telling ministers what they need to do. You can look at, for example, we have this constitutional principle of cabinet solidarity, whereas ministers like Karina Gold, for example, who is now no longer in cabinet, who came out kind of opposed to some of the policies that the Trudeau government was putting in place. It's not because she agreed with them at the time that she was defending them, but because of this process and this concentration of power within the party and within the prime minister's office that occurs, no matter who's in government. You saw the same with Stephen Harper. You would see the same with anyone else in power. And that's to do with our system. And so what I will say is, even though there's one change and some of the bench is the same, what does change is the vision for the party. What changes is the policies that are being put forward, and what changes is kind of the leader at the top of the ticket. And when that changes, I think it's a fair criticism to say that some of these folks have been around a while or have been around. But you also could say the same thing that, Pierre Poilievre was in Stephen Harper's government. He's been in Parliament since he was 24. And so what is he offering that's a change other than, being a different option? And so I would say that Mark Carney, there definitely does need to be some work done on how do you speak to voters and say, we're different. And I think they're working on that right now. But I also would say is that he has a very fundamentally different approach, a more pragmatic approach, and maybe have a technocratic approach to governance. And I think that will be reflected within whoever sits in cabinet, because the prime minister takes the lead on all conversations within cabinet, takes the lead on the conversations within the government, and sets kind of the bounds to which ministers can operate in. And in my view, I think Mark Carney can kind of affect this culture change that we're already seeing. And he's already been proving results, even within 9 days as prime minister. Imagine what he could do with a majority government, as well as people that are stepping up to the plate like Stephen Fuhr, Mayor Gregor Robertson, Mayor Amarjeet Sohi out of Edmonton. There's some big names stepping forward as well. That will fill out the bench and kind of offer this difference of perspective that I think is important.
Yeah, the Bloc, Blanchet came out, Bloc Québécois leader, coming out and saying that Mark Carney's copying Pierre Poilievre's platforms and his ideas. And, some could argue and say that he's copying or plagiarizing, but some people would say that's actually brilliant, because a lot of the stuff that appeals to Canadians right now is Carney's taking the best of that and actually taking that and molding that into his platform. And then I guess a lot of people are saying that why would you want to vote for change when basically you're getting all the change you need with the same party?
So I think one thing that, at least in my personal view on politics, is the best politicians and best people that serve in government are those that kind of approach issues not as ideologues, that are willing to reflect kind of the view of individuals at a certain point in time. And so I think the fact that the Liberal Party has shifted a bit, maybe taking on some of the criticisms of Pierre Poilievre's opposition, and seeing that Canadians do want to change, but they don't necessarily want a conservative government. They want a government that still prioritizes social services and prioritizes supporting the middle class. But they do want, let's say, the carbon tax to go, which it's gone. They do want, a reduction on this capital gains tax that was being implemented. They do want certain changes. And so I think it shows kind of the leadership of Mark Carney in that sense, that we're not going to keep going blind with ideas without taking into account the perspective of voters. And so I don't see it as him copying a platform. I think I see him as reflecting where people are at right now, where people are at in this moment in time. And that main concern really is Donald Trump, in my view. But I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think that...
Yeah, I think that's fine. The carbon tax or climate change was like the main platform for the Trudeau Liberals. And I'll kind of use Trudeau Liberals and Carney Liberals. The Trudeau Liberals, that was kind of his main platform, because he said, a couple of faux pas when he said, I don't worry about the economy. And obviously that shows 10 years later.
That's a low blow, but no, I'm kidding.
Well, I don't know. And I'll give credit to Carney. He is an economist, basically. You know what I mean? So that fixes that hole, right? Because he did say that. Those are his words, not mine, right? I don't worry about the economy, and again, it shows, because that's where we're at, right? Because we're kind of at a place where we didn't build pipelines. We have one customer really for one of our biggest assets, which is energy, and we're reliant on that one customer. And I guess the question I have for you is on energy, because Mark Carney is kind of couched in how he uses those words. He doesn't really talk about Jean Chrétien in the speech there, I watched his speech, and we had Jean Chrétien here speak. He is my kind of my political hero. Jean Chrétien speak here in 2019, and he talked about a pipeline east to west, and let's get it built. But Mark Carney more couches that and talks about energy, and I know that like climate change is a big part of Brookfield Asset Management, and a big part of what he believes in is also he was kind of in the background with that too. So how do you think that he's going to kind of like balance that, especially with Alberta talking about a unity crisis and that? And a lot of people are saying now that perhaps Donald Trump is supporting Mark Carney because he wants a unity crisis.
Well, I mean, to unpack that a bit, I would say Danielle Smith is like the exception to the general rule. I mean, she's kind of gone off the deep end a bit on a lot of things. And public sentiment in Alberta may be that they're supporting the Conservatives, which is, not a surprise. But it also, though, if you look at the polling numbers behind that, as into who supports secession from Alberta, who supports, a unified Canada, and so on, the numbers are like 75% of people are in favor of a unified Canada, or against kind of some of these measures that Danielle Smith's gone off, and talking with Ben Shapiro, and it just doesn't really reflect what a premier usually should be doing. But that's aside from the fact. With energy, I would say that it needs to be very consciously done. One thing that I do believe is that multiple things can be true at the same time. I think that we need to take into account the perspective that energy has done for Canada. I mean, Canada wouldn't have been a country without resource development, and we wouldn't be in such a strong position, or globally speaking, we wouldn't be in a strong position without that energy. And in a time of crisis where the economy is really in people's faces, it's really hard to say to folks that they should worry about their climate, worry about climate change. It seems like a far removed thing. I mean, we see in polls as well, when times are good, when the economy's good, people would love to do more for climate. When the economy's bad, we really need to, take perspective and see.
It's kitchen table issues. Yeah, kitchen table issues become more prominent, right? It's like putting food on the table, gas in the car, and that kind of thing.
Yes, and so I think that what I appreciate with the Liberals is that they're not taking all or nothing approach when it comes to energy and climate. It's not like you can have one without the other. And I think maybe that's why Mark Carney's words seem to be a little more nuanced, let's say, as opposed to Pierre Poilievre, who says, like, let's just dig wells and drill oil and get it all done and whatever, when in fact that wouldn't happen because many of the provinces are opposed to some of that, like Quebec primarily. It's, natural resources are not a federal responsibility, they're a provincial responsibility. And so I think at least Mark Carney is being keeping a keen eye towards the fact that you can't promise that we're going to build a pipeline across Canada without getting the provinces bought in as well, and without maintaining some of our climate commitments that are important to, I would say, a majority of Canadians.
So other people, including us, would say that media has been compromised in Canada because of Bill C-18. I think Bill C-18 is that fight that the Liberals, Trudeau Liberals, picked with Meta, and that we're the only G7 nation, and probably one of the only nations in the world, where news outlets aren't allowed to put news on the Meta platforms. And at that time, we got to ask the question of Justin Trudeau here, is that will you rescind Bill C-18? Because outlets like ours aren't selectively funded. Some outlets are, some aren't, and that's all at the discretion of the Liberal government. And then a lot of them, if we look at the globals, the stock chart, they're like teetering on bankruptcy, and a lot of the other ones are in really rough shape too. So a lot of them are really beholden to these subsidies, and and not just the CBC, but a lot of them are really beholden to these subsidies. And the threat of a Poilievre government coming in, taking away subsidies and defunding the CBC really puts media in a compromised situation. Do you not think Bill C-18 should be repealed, and so we have more freedom and independent press? Because during fires, we have people have been scrambling to get information because news outlets cannot put their information on Meta.
Yeah, I would say so. Looking at a couple things, and you're looking at who you're going to vote for this election. I mean, the Liberal Party has not threatened to cut subsidies to news organizations and public news like the CBC, which is
I just
critically
thought
important.
1 second there. They actually, in a Mark Carney thing, a reporter asked, because it said you ask questions like that, then they actually threaten the media and say we could cut your subsidies if you're going to ask tough questions. And I thought that was pretty bad.
I mean, I didn't see that. I would advise not to say that again. But with that being said, I think it's just been more blatant that a Poilievre government would come in with a chainsaw, similar to some of the folks down in the United States right now, and try and cut some of that funding. When regards to Bill C-18, I mean, here's the real issue too, is that right now people are so, and rightfully so, focused on the United States and focused on the economy. I think it's difficult for any candidate to have a solid discussion on those particular, Bill C-18 in particular. I do think that it does need to get repealed or at least changed, because when you get feedback from community members, and you get feedback from those that are in the industry, you definitely need to change as you go. And I think that with Bill C-18, I think there should probably be a happy medium. We need to keep these large organizations accountable to them using news media to make their own profits without actually subsidizing the news media that creates the content. But at the same time, we also can't leave local news outlets to the wayside. And I think that,
So I'm just going to help you. I'm going to help you with some stats and facts. Close to 100 outlets have failed. Independent outlets have failed since the introduction of Bill C-18. They were warned when they introduced it that it would kill many outlets, including like ourselves, because it took away outlets across Canada, including the CBC, have lost half of their online traffic. Most outlets have lost half of their traditional revenues, and it has not hurt Facebook in the slightest. Like Facebook, since this has happened, Facebook's stock went from 200 to 700. Global stock went from $10 to whatever, like 9 cents. This has been devastating for media outlets and devastating for communities that do not have access to news in time of crisis. And it's been devastating for us. Like, we're hanging on by a thread, and we keep asking. And when Justin Trudeau was here, he said he would not bow down to the Meta. He called him some name, the Meta whatever, like the devil or whatever, basically, and that they were boycotting Meta as well. But just before the end of the year here, the Liberal Party started advertising on Facebook, and when we asked them why, they said that they recognize that that Canadians get like their news from social media, and the only way for them to get their news out there is to actually pay Meta. So the Liberal government was actually paying Meta, who's supposed to be the devil, and they were protecting us from them, is actually paying, and Mark Carney's Liberals are now advertising like crazy on Meta, and we still cannot put our content on Meta.
So, I mean, I can't speak from my own. I can only speak for my own opinion. I mean,
Sure.
I see Bill C-18 as kind of a circular reasoning of sorts, in the sense that we want these companies to subsidize local journalists, which then the result of that, if they don't, is that the news isn't online. So then people start getting their news where? From social media, from the very places that
from podcasters, from people that don't have journalistic standards, from all these places. Yeah, we've gone through all that, and we've said that this is what's going to happen. And then so outlets like ourselves that have journalists that used to run the CTV desk, like, We have the most experienced newsroom in the Okanagan, and yet here we are, and we're at the mercy of the Liberal government that won't listen. We've sent letters. We have letters of support from all our MLAs. We have letters of support from the leaders in British Columbia. We have letters of support from our city of Kelowna, and they just won't listen. They have this so-called ideological fight with Meta that they're not going to win. Meta, Australia tried to do the same thing, and Australia backed down. Nobody's having this fight other than and then it's hypocritical now. And I won't spend too much time. I think I've made the point there, and I don't think, I mean,
I will say that I think that the best person to bring that advocacy to Ottawa is Stephen Fuhr, and is his ability to.
Well, maybe you can ask Stephen Fuhr to do an interview with me, because he has so far refused to do an interview with me. So there's that.
Well, I can't speak for Stephen Fuhr, but I can.
So there's that. We'll move on to another question, though. One of the big things that's really kind of like that's come up time and time again is when we talk about Stephen Fuhr, is defense and NATO, right? Like our that's come up, especially with the Liberals talking about Chrystia Freeland obviously exaggerated it by saying we could have tanks in the street and stuff like that. We need to get nuclear weapons, but we clearly have underspent in our military. We have 40-year-old jet fighters, and Stephen Fuhr is a fighter pilot. We have 40-year-old jets, and we don't have that many. We have no nuclear warships, no nuclear submarines, and no nuclear icebreakers. And the North could be the most economic passageway in the world, better than the Suez Canal, better than the Panama Canal. And there's a lot of countries up there vying for it, including the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese somehow staking a claim in the North. So how important is NATO spending? And it's kind of been kind of like ignored for a long time, and not just the Liberals, like the parties. You know what I mean? It's been kind of like, I guess we've trusted to live underneath the umbrella of the Americans for a long time, and now all of a sudden, what's going on in the South, we shouldn't have that luxury anymore.
So one thing off the top is the only reason the North is going to become, or is one of the most important passageways, is because of climate change. That you wouldn't have thought that there's going to be a passageway through there unless there was a warming climate. But putting that aside, I do believe that now that I'm not a candidate and can speak how I feel as well, is that we do need to increase defense spending. It is not a given that the United States will defend NATO countries. It's been stated, and now it's been thrown out that we need to increase it to 4% of GDP, whatever the case may be. But we need to invest more in defense, and the Liberal government is saying they will. It's an important, I think, movement within the political kind of conversation right now, is that we have commitments from both parties to increase defense spending. And I think it's really, really important. I agree with what you're saying. We definitely don't want to increase the amount of nuclear weapons involved in the world, but we can definitely invest in kind of our partnerships with NATO countries, our partnerships in training, updating our own infrastructure, and in trying to increase recruitment. I think that's another important piece that we're not seeing.
Yeah, I won't dwell too much on the NATO thing. I think a lot of people recognize it needs to be fixed, and especially with the North, because like if we don't have some presence up there, other people are going to take it, and that's not going to be great for Canada. But for young people, especially your age, and the biggest frustration for them is housing, being able to afford a home. Just the Trudeau Liberals said they were going to build 650,000 homes. That was Sean Fraser. I did an interview with Sean Fraser as well. They said they were going to build 650,000 homes a year. CMHC, in a leaked document too, they knew when they said that number was nowhere even, not possible. And in a leaked document, they said that they just put it out there anyway. CMHC said that the best they've ever done was like 274,000 homes in a year. And that was when we had a younger workforce. We have a lot of boomers now that are aging out. Mark Carney's now come out, the Carney Liberals have now come out and said they're going to build 500,000 homes a year. And I just don't know if 274 was our record, how are we going to get to 500,000 homes? And that being one of our biggest problems too, right?
Well, I would say that a big big piece that has been quite successful that conservative MPs themselves have been advocating for more of is the Housing Accelerator Fund. We've seen the city come out and support it. We've seen millions of dollars come into Kelowna, particularly. And that's one tool kind of in the toolbox for encouraging more housing. And I think it's a really important issue that needs to be addressed. And one that I don't think the Conservatives themselves have really admitted has been a victory for the Liberal government. Maybe they haven't met certain goals, but there definitely is more housing on the market. The other piece that is going to be difficult for anyone to navigate is how do we measure what is considered a newly built home and so on and so forth. And so I think that there needs to be an agreed set of terms of how do we measure that, because without that being clear, then we don't really know what these promises and numbers are. I do think, though, the Liberal promise to get the government back in the business of building houses is important, and one that, while Pierre Poilievre was, in Stephen Harper's government, I believe he was the Minister of Housing. I don't think he built a single home. The reason why we're here is because of Stephen Harper's neglect when in government. And I do take note that the Liberals have been in power for 9 years. It does take a while to catch up on such a low supply of housing. And
actually, those numbers have been dropping, though. Just to be fair, those numbers have been dropping. It's. I think the part of the problem and the stress, though, and we can talk about this, is immigration levels were at a record high, which obviously led to a lot of housing strain and a lot of healthcare strain, right? So I know that they're trying to dial that back, but I mean, if you add into already stressed supply, all that demand, obviously you're going to create a lot of problems. But the question has been, some people put forward is Mark Carney has hired one of the consultants that is in this 100 million population plan. So how are they going to meet that if they're going to go back to increasing immigration and then that housing supply, which is already stressed? We've done stories on people dying in waiting rooms because they can't access healthcare.
So I mean, I would say that I think this idea that immigration has been contributing to housing strain is, I think, just a result of the politics of the day. I mean, we need immigrants in Canada to maintain the level of taxation that we need to support an aging population. I mean, we're almost in a contracting population. And so without immigrants, Canada's population and the amount of working people paying taxes to healthcare, to services, will not be enough. By the time I get old, it's not only that I won't be able to find a home, I won't even be able to get in a caring facility. And so that's a real reality, is that, we do need immigration to... I
don't think anybody's arguing that we don't need immigration. Even the Trudeau Liberals have come out and said that it was too high, that they actually stepped on the gas pedal way too much, and that there was strain.
They did, but I also do think that there's a changing sentiment as to, I think the honesty in that is that they didn't do enough to build enough homes, because at that time it wasn't really a federal responsibility, and it still technically isn't a federal responsibility. It's up to the provinces to respond to a lot of that, but the federal government now, under Mark Carney, has said they're going to get involved. They're going to continue to get involved. And
well, they've actually said they're going to build the homes. The government's going to get involved and build the homes. That reminds me of a Ronald Reagan quote: "We're from the government. We're here to help." And that's when you should run, he said, right? Anyway.
Well, I mean, I do say, though, that the government, they need to build more housing. They've promised to build more housing. Poilievre conservative government would not do that. And even though they said they're going to build the homes, whatever their other slogans are, they have no plan for doing so.
The last one I'll ask you about is Justin Trudeau ran. I mean, a lot of people saying Pierre Poilievre accuses the government of being broken and the country being broken. Justin Trudeau, when he ran in 2015, that was basically his campaign ad. The country's broken, right? I don't know if you remember. I can get it for you if I need to send it to you. But he also said he ran on accountability and transparency. And I think that has been one of the things that has frustrated so many in Canada. Because even one of the reasons the government was prorogued was because they wouldn't release those documents for that green slush fund. How are we going to get a more accountable and transparent government? Do you think Carney's Liberals will be more accountable and transparent than Trudeau?
Couple things. One is, I mean, the RCMP in that kind of that when Parliament was stalled,
Yeah.
was because of the RCMP said they didn't want them to release the documents. They said that if there was a problem, they would request them. So that was kind of a stall tactic of an effective opposition leader, like we were saying, but not an effective prime minister. And so the next thing is that Mark Carney has been, I think, in his time in the public sector, in the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, transparency and honesty and is a part of the job. And I think he takes a pragmatic approach to really disclosing to Canadians what the truth is when they need to know it, and what we're going to do to respond. And I think if we kind of narrow it down as well, and you look at the candidates that are running in this race, Stephen Fuhr was a member of Parliament. Tracy Gray was a member of Parliament. I think, to be truthful, Stephen Fuhr has the ability and has the record to show that he's willing to stand up for Kelowna as well, regardless of what government is in power.
You brought up disclosure, and this is the question that's been pressed by Globe and Mail and pressed by CBC. Mark Carney will not disclose, and he says he's disclosed as much as he's willing to disclose, but he will not disclose his holdings in this blind trust fund. Do you think to settle Canadians' anxiety over that he should disclose? And then there's a lot of questions now coming about his ties with China. Do you think he should just disclose and be more open with Canadians? He's been caught also in that moving Brookfield too, in which the CBC has said was a couched truth, right?
I mean, obviously, if you want to get in front of an issue, you get in front of it. And if there really is, nothing to, I think the frustration from the Carney camp is that there's this idea that he's trying to hide something. It's not true.
So the way to get rid of that is just to disclose, though, isn't it? Isn't that the way to get rid of that?
The other response to say is like the way to get rid of it would be for Pierre Poilievre to get a security clearance in NSCA.
I think on that one, I think you like Tom McClare. Tom McClare answered. Yes. He answered that question for you. So that he said that's a non-issue. That's just a mugging, and that has nothing that should be talked about. That security issue. That's just a red herring.
Here's the problem. I agree with that as well. I'm just bringing it up as an example as to how an issue can kind of become this red herring that realistically, Mark Carney disclosing any of his financial assets and so on and so forth. What is that going to do?
Well, I'll tell you why, because I'm an accountant as well, and conflict or perceived conflict of interest, because he's making policy decisions. He's making policy decisions for Canada that are economic, that may or may not benefit Brookfield Asset Management. And so if Brookfield Asset Management benefits from climate change policies and he's making those policies, then we should know how that's benefiting. So that is the reason for the disclosure, right? Because when he says it's a blind trust, again, if he knows what he put into the blind trust, it's not very blind, right? Do you know what I mean? It's not like it's a trading account. It's different if he just put cash in and then these guys took the cash and invested in whatever. He didn't know what it is. He knows it's in Brookfield Asset Management because he's got a bunch of options in there. So he knows what's in there. So if he's making policy that benefits Brookfield, I think that's why Canadians want to know and perhaps, in my opinion, deserve to know.
Yeah, and I do. I mean, I think that's also, there comes almost like a give and take a bit, is that obviously Mark Carney is going to be a wealthy individual and have many, investments and assets. And that's part of the reason why, he has those is because he's been so successful in managing the economy, and in kind of leading Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, looking at his resume. And so I think the problem that I have with that sometimes is that it becomes almost a fault of Carney that he has some kind of blind trust and so on. But
I think, like, to me, I don't know if he should make a lot of money at Bank of Canada, Bank of England, but as Brookfield Asset Manager chair, obviously he's made a lot of money, because otherwise he'd be a really bad chair. Do you know what I mean? Like, because those companies have made billions of dollars, right? So, and I've worked in public companies, and I know that, you know, if you're running a big public company, obviously you need to benefit, because that's part of the whole shareholder agreement thing. But on the other hand of that, then we recognize that he is wealthy, then just say what it is, so that it doesn't become this nagging question, because I don't believe the Canadian media are going to leave that alone, and neither will the opposition and all those things. I think it's going to come up over and over and over and over again until there is disclosure. That's the only way to put it to bed, really.
And I think, yeah, I tend to agree. I think if you want to get out in front of it, then you've got to get out in front of it.
Right.
And there's also going to be, you know, an ethics commissioner. There's a whole framework in place within Parliament and within the government that manages conflicts of interest. How well they do it, who knows? It's not kind of my area of expertise per se, but I do know that one thing before we come an end to time is that if you're a New Democrat, you need to support Stephen Fuhr, because Stephen Fuhr is the best candidate to support workers, social services, and just our country in general. And our country needs a strong mandate with someone like Mark Carney at the helm. And all of the issues that come, there's going to be issues with every single leader. You're not going to fall in love with any political party. But get informed and make sure you get out and vote, I guess, is kind of my closing thoughts, unless you have other questions as well.
No, I think that was good. We should do more often. It's always great debate. We're gonna be here April 28th, and we're gonna do the whole night, just like we did the provincial election. And you should join us. You'd be the voice on the. We can talk. We can talk after we go off here. You hang on for a second, eh? We do
Sure,
thank
for
you
sure.
we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.